Hey, it's Sparky, Fifer 1250 AM, The Fan, beautiful Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Follow me on Twitter at Sparky Radio. Check us out at 1250 AM, The Fan. Don't forget, back on the air again after Bucks games, the remainder of the year and through the postseason. Potawatomi Sportsbook Pro Hoops postgame show served up by Wendy's after every Bucks game. So make sure to make the switch over to 1250 AM, The Fan. Stream us on your Odyssey app. Joining us now, Ryan Horvath off from BetMGM tonight. In his place, Ian Cummings, of course, draft analyst for Pro Football Network. Follow him on Twitter at IC_draft. Ian, thanks a lot for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. We're in April finally, so we're on the home stretch. It's been a long time coming, but happy to be here. Happy to be on that final straightaway, and we got a lot more to go over in terms of potential outcomes for the draft. We still don't know what's going to happen, but
no doubt. Yeah, last time we talked was February, so a lot has happened since then and now. Before we get into Packers, Pro Days, Combine, all that other stuff we have to go over, I wanted to get you on mainly to talk about this very cool feature on Pro Football Network. As I said the last time, I'm on that app, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times a day doing mock drafts. And I noticed that you guys started draft rooms to where people can draft with one another doing these mock drafts, which is a feature that I don't think exists anywhere else. Talk about that.
Yeah, so it's the multi-user update for the MDS. It's been a long time coming. We've been working on it behind the scenes, and we're still updating it. We're getting user feedback, and that's been very valuable. But this is a really fun update because you can play the role of GM with your friends in real time with these rooms. You can join a public room, or you can set up a private room with a password and invite your own friends and mock with them. So it's been a lot of fun to kind of see that process through. And I was part of the beta testing behind the scenes in the final days before we released it. It was a lot of fun to go through that. But basically the goal is to make it even more immersive. The MDS as a solo user tool is already pretty immersive. It allows you to see what prospects are on the board. You can look at the reports that are there on the MDS, and you can make your picks. You can trade with the CPU, but now you can do that with fellow users. So it adds a whole new layer of immersion to it and allows you to play the role of GM even deeper. So it's a fun tool. And with the weeks leading up to the draft still yet to play out, it's going to help people go through the outcomes and get that extra human element to it.
The other thing I guess I'm curious about, and I don't know if you guys do it or not, how often do you update kind of your draft board as far as where players, fall? If the computer just does it as far as, after the combine, after these pro days, after, the RAS scores are in and all that other stuff, how often does that draft board kind of get updated on the site to make it as realistic as possible?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it. Those big checkpoints in the offseason, like the Senior Bowl, the All-Star Circuit, the NFL Combine, those are checkpoints that we look at to reevaluate those rankings. And we kind of, you go through the whole cycle, before the season, pretty much bi-weekly, even sometimes weekly during the season, just kind of reevaluating and making sure we're in the right spot after the season. And then those landmark events in the offseason, we kind of use those checkpoints as areas where we can look at that. Yeah. Now that we're close to the draft, it's mostly set in stone, right? But we are going to look at it one more time, probably the beginning of next week, just to make sure we're on the right track. Now, obviously, I have my rankings, right? But it's not exactly that. We try to factor in gamification a little bit more. For example, JJ McCarthy, not a top 10 guy on my board personally, but we know he's probably going to go top 10, right? So you want him to be up there so the user gets a realistic experience. So we're always trying to fine tune it to make sure that it stays realistic for them. We're pretty much set in stone, but we try to use those checkpoints to, find times to update it. And then we'll get one more check-in before the draft here.
So this is the thing. When we talk about the trade aspect of it, and how that works, how do you factor in the trade proposals and what's realistic, what's not realistic if I'm trying to trade with a team that's operated by the computer?
Yeah, and Kent Lee Platty, our mastermind behind the MDS Math Bomb on Twitter. He's posting the relative athletic scores, the RAS all the time too. He's the main brains behind that. So I would defer to him for any general explanation. But we do look at the trade charts to see where the value lies and how things add up to comparable value for certain teams, right? For the user, it just you've got your picks this year, you've got your picks next year. Last year, we played around with player trades as well. It's difficult with player trades because that can be a lot more volatile. You don't know who's going to be traded, and sometimes the timeline can expand for guys who, like T. Higgins, right? There were rumors that he was going to maybe get traded. We still haven't seen it yet. And then Stephon Diggs, no one knew that he was going to be traded, and then all of a sudden today he's off to the Texans, right? So that's a little tougher to predict. But with the draft capital, we use that chart to delineate where the value is and how it adds up for certain teams, and then you can make offers and counter offers from there.
Yeah, that draft chart, the Jimmy Johnson Cowboys draft chart from back in the day, and everybody's made their modifications and changes to what draft picks are worth and points and all this other stuff that goes along with it. A big trade happened prior to us doing this podcast here on Wednesday. Stephon Diggs now on his way to the Houston Texans for a second round pick. That'll be the Vikings second round pick coming up in, what was it, 2025. And then they get like a 5 and a 6 back or whatever. In my mind, that makes obviously the Texans probably one of the favorites, if not the favorite right now out in the AFC. However, even with the Brandon Ayuk situation with the Niners, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded him either, just because this wide receiver class is so deep. I'm sure the Bills look at it and go, he's kind of a headache. And we can maybe get a couple nice, good young wide receivers in this draft and still be okay when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback like Josh Allen.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This draft class alone, I think I have almost 24 guys that are in the day 2 range at the very least. And then I have 5 or 6 that are worthy of round 1 capital too. So it's a really deep class, the wide receiver position. I think teams like the Bills, late in the first round, you have a few guys that like A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Xavier Legette as well. Keon Coleman potentially, who you might be looking at as an X receiver with some versatility there. But then even farther down the board, there's an opportunity for a lot of teams to double dip and still get quality receiver talent on day 2 and even on day 3. So if there's any opportunity to kind of reset the clock, get some more cap flexibility, and get a new young talent with a lot of upside, this receiver class provides that opportunity.
Talking with Ian Cummings. Again, follow him on Twitter at IC_draft. He, of course, the NFL draft analyst for Pro Football Network. Okay, as we look at the first round now, since we last talked in February, we've had all of these different things happen. The Combine, Pro Days, free agency, so forth. Who are a couple of the guys that have been the risers since the last time we've talked?
Risers, man, it's difficult because you never want to be too elastic with the NFL Combine, right? Because it should really only be a cross-checking event, right? You're usually not discovering anything completely new about a prospect. Usually you're just kind of cross-checking with what you see on the tape. The wide receiver class, though, I mean, it was really impressive to see all those guys test the way they did. I look at guys like Ricky Pearsall, Ladd McConkey, Jermaine Burton, Roman Wilson as well, guys who are kind of in that middle 9 to 12 tier of the receiver group, right? But could also go in the top 50, right? I think all those guys fit more of the mold of they don't bring the size that a Brian Thomas Jr. does, or an A.D. Mitchell, or a Legette, right? Or even a Marvin Harrison Jr., Roma Dunze. But they're really nuanced separators with that speed to threaten vertically, and that can help them create space even more. And then they got strong hands too. Ricky Pearsall, Jermaine Burton had one of the lowest drop rates this past year. Roman Wilson is very good at catching beyond his frame. Ladd McConkey is very strong with his hands over the middle of the field. So I look at those guys, and I think if I could pick a cluster of players who really helped themselves this offseason, it will be them, because they don't blow you away with their measurables, but they're very translatable prospects who have that athleticism to kind of channel that through. So really impressed with what they showed. And then I think on the defensive side of the ball, just some of the guys that we already knew, right? We knew Dallas Turner was a freak, but he confirmed it, right? We knew Nate Wiggins was going to run really fast. I think Terrion Arnold helped himself a lot too. He was already a highly graded player on my board, but he's a top 10 guy now because he's just so fluid for his size. And then you got guys like Jared Verse as well. I think most of those guys kind of reaffirmed what we saw. But if I could pick a rising group, that wide receiver group for sure.
Let's stick with the cornerback group, if you don't mind. That's more of an interest to the Packers, considering the Packers are pretty good at wide receiver at this point. We talk about cornerbacks. Where's the drop-off? Like, is there multiple drop-offs as far as, okay, we've got, these 3 that are really good. Then there's a drop off. Then there's a section of maybe 4 or 5 guys. And then there's another drop off to everybody else, kind of where are those dips that if the Packers want a cornerback, and I think they do, where if you're at 25, you're thinking to yourself, okay, if one of these 3 guys are there, that's first round grade worthy. Otherwise you can just wait till the second round.
Yeah, for sure. I think you have the top 2, Terrion Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo. I think those guys are pretty safe at the top for me. Kool-Aid McKinstry is my 3rd corner, and he's kind of in a tier by himself for me. He's a very good player, not quite at the level that Mitchell and Arnold are from a pure grade perspective, but I think he's been overlooked at times this cycle. We kind of forget about him because we got Arnold on the other side, but McKinstry is a very technically sound corner with man and zone capabilities. You talk about the fluidity, but he's got enough vertical speed to work. Really physical and press man, but also very composed and patient in zone. Really great pedal as well. He's got ball skills, savvy, and support. So he's my CB3 comfortably. And I think if you're the Packers, if you're looking for a corner and you're hoping for one to fall to you at 25, if he's there, I think that's a really good value. Nate Wiggins, a little bit lower on my board, but still first round caliber corner. So I think if you're looking at corner, Wiggins and McKinstry are probably the top options for you. Wiggins is a little bit lighter for sure. And I do think that translates to play strength issues at times. But I mean, the 4.2 the high 4.2 recovery speed shows up on tape. He's very explosive. He's very good at stemming vertical separation, right? And then in zone, he's got great route recognition ability. He can trigger on routes and click and close in an instant. Great playmaking ability too. So those guys are kind of separated. And then after that, that's where the round one options start to peter out a little bit. But there's still a lot of talent on day two. I look at guys like TJ Tampa from Iowa State, right? I think he's long, he's athletic, he's fluid, he's got great coverage, versatility, and variability. Max Melton from Rutgers, who's the brother of Bo Melton, who's on the Packers roster. He's a fun one too. He's 5'11", but he's got 32-inch arms, so you got that length to disrupt, and then he's very fluid, explosive, again, vertical speed, physicality, slot boundary, versatility as well. And then once you get into the weeds, you get guys like Mike Sainristil from Michigan, who's more of a slot guy, but he's very, very physical, very versatile. Big fan of what he has to offer. And then other guys, Kamari Lassiter doesn't quite have that elite vertical speed, but a really solid press man corner with good fluidity and tracking in zone. And you go down the board, there's a lot of corners after that. But I think that's how I would tier it. I think you have those top two. You got those middle two with McKinstry and Wiggins, who are still worthy of first-round capital. And then that's when you start to transition into the day two range.
What about from a tackling perspective? Who are the best tackling corners in this draft if we look at it from that perspective? Because if there's one thing that I know Packer fans are irritated by, it's by missed tackles by this Packers defense time and time again for the last decade, I'd say. It's always been a bad tackling defense, and that's something that they really need to focus on regardless of position in this draft.
Yeah, I think the top tackling corners off the top of my head, probably Lassiter is up there for sure. That Georgia tape is really impressive with him. He's not just good at tackling, but also triggering on screens early and getting up those upfield paths, scraping past blockers as well. And then he's got great tackling form too. The biggest thing about tackling, lead with your shoulder, right? But also wrap up with your length. A lot of corners, they'll launch into contact and they won't wrap up with solid form. And then that's where they can kind of scrape off guys, right? So Lassiter is very good at finishing. I think Kamari Lassiter is probably the best tackling corner of the class. Terrion Arnold is up there too, and that's why he's my top cute CB. That's one reason. He's just so good in support at not just, tackling, but encumbering blocks too and deconstructing. I think those are the top two for sure. A lot of guys kind of fit that mold where they're physical enough for sure. It's just the tackling form can still be more consistent. I look at some of the lighter guys like DJ James, Chris Abrams-Drain, who definitely fall into that category. Ennis Rakestraw is pretty good, but again, some consistency issues with him as well. I think if you're looking for the guys who are really sure tacklers, Lassiter and Arnold are definitely at the top of the list.
Let's break it down to another category. Best press man coverage corners in this draft, because Jeff Hafley, the new defensive coordinator for the Packers who came from Boston College, definitely likes playing more press man than probably was the previous regime like to do under Joe Barry.
Yeah, I would say Ennis Rakestraw is up there from Missouri. He is really good in press man. That's probably where he lives best. I think he's a little leaner, but he's very fleet-footed. He's got great corrective athleticism, and he's very physical. He'll get right up in your grill. He will dictate the depth on releases, and he's not going to give you enough space. I think, off man and zone is where he can improve a little bit. So if you can keep him in his element, which is playing right up in the face of the receiver and matching movements, Rakestraw is definitely near the top of the list. Kalen Carson from Wake Forest is another one. I think he gets slept on sometimes. Another player who gets overlooked, but another really fleet-footed athlete with great corrective athleticism and recovery, twitch, and quickness. And he's very good at, I think he has better sync over top routes too. So he can press vertically once you commit vertically and then swivel his hips and just clamp down on comebacks and hitches. And he's very good at disrupting timing with his jams as well. So Kalen Carson from Wake Forest. Bernardo Green from Florida State has to be another one for me. He actually played against Malik Neighbors in week 1 against LSU and really held his own. He limited Neighbors to very little production. You could see at the line, he thrives when he's able to attack the frame, right? Just attack downhill, disrupt timing, again, using his length and his physicality. But then at the same time, too, he's got pretty good zone ability as well. I think more of a press man guy because I don't love his fluidity in space. But when he's able to dictate routes and route leverage and release packages, again, that's where he thrives. I think those are the top three guys for me. But you go down the list, Jarvis Brownlee from Louisville is a really good sleeper. Impressed man. MJ Devonshire from Pitt, 5'11", but over 33-inch arms. So that's a great profile to work with and press. A few sleepers in there for sure. But I think those top three, Kalen Carson is up there, Rakestraw is up there, and then Renardo Green. Max Melton is very good as well.
Let's talk a little bit about that safety position. Obviously, since last time we talked, the Packers go out and sign a young stud safety and Xavier McKinney from the New York Giants, pay him a ton of money. So that takes care of one safety position. Now they've got to figure out what they're going to do with the other safety position. I think common sense allows you to go to the aspect of they're going to draft one or two probably. And I would assume one of them will be high. I don't think anybody is worth taking in the first round, in my humble opinion. I'm not the draft analyst like you. So I would imagine it was probably more likely going to be one of those 2 second-round picks will be where the safety comes from for the Packers. In that second round, how do you have those guys shaping up?
Yeah, and I remember last time we talked, we were talking about Tyler Nubin maybe being a trade back candidate for you. I think now that you've gotten McKinney, there's a little bit of pressure alleviated there. I don't think you have to reach for him in round one. He's a fringe round one guy for me. I like his tape a lot. And he's my best pure safety. Cooper DeJean is my best safety, projecting him to safety from corner. But Nubin's very good. I think Nubin would complement McKinney well. It's just a matter of he might be past your range. So looking at those second rounders, some of the guys that stack up on my board, I got DeJean. I have a Nubin. Dadrian Taylor Demerson from Texas Tech is one guy that I like a lot. He's in my top 5. I think he might be a little redundant with McKinney, though. I don't know if he's big enough to play in that support role underneath them when McKinney goes a little bit higher up. So McKinney's kind of that post safety. You can play single high, 2 high as well. So I think Dadrian Taylor Demerson fits that role too. So I would steer clear of him just because there is some redundancy in their skill sets. The top 3 guys that come to mind for me, if you're looking at safety with, I guess 4, I'll throw 4 in there. If you're looking at safety with one of those 2 picks, you've got Jaden Hicks from Washington State.
That's who I like. That's my guy.
Yeah, he's very fun. I just finalized him the other day. Big fan of him. He's a top 75 guy for me. Malik Mustafa from Wake Forest. If you want a good tackler, he's probably the best tackler in the class from safety. And he's very rangy too. He's explosive, really dense, compact player who has some off-man versatility in the slot and coverage too. So I like Mustafa a lot. He's one of my guys. And then you've got, there's another one, 5 safeties I'll go to. Javon Bullard from Georgia is a fun one. He's got some nickel versatility too. He's a little bit lighter, but he's got good compact mass. My comp for him is Jordan Whitehead, who's been a really solid player. And he can play in support. He can play nickel. He's got a lot of versatility to you. Bo Braid from Maryland, around 5'11", 6 foot, over 200. Really dense, stocky, just rocked up player with a ton of tenacity coming downhill. I mean, if you want a safety who can square up with tight ends on the line and hold the line and prevent displacement and just wreak havoc and support, Bo Braid is your guy, but he's got some coverage versatility to him as well. I think Jaden Hicks is a little more fluid in space, but I do think Bo Braid is really good at managing positioning. And then one more, Cole Bishop from Utah. Again,
another guy I like.
Yeah, really fits that strong safety mold because he's just so natural at combating and deconstructing blocks. And he's got some good coverage versatility too, the fluidity. He tested better than expected, but it shows up on tape, the explosiveness and the fluidity that he has. So I think those 5 guys, Jaden Hicks, Javon Bullard, Malik Mustafa, Bo Braid, and Cole Bishop. If you can get one of those guys, I think that's a perfect fit for your defense.
What has happened to Kinchins from Miami? I mean, coming in when these original mock drafts started coming out a couple months ago, Kinchins was a first rounder. He was the first safety off the board and so forth. And as we went through this process, I'm just watching a lot of these mock drafts. He's just fallen like a rock throughout the process. What happened? Did people just not watch him enough to understand what this kid was about, or what happened?
I think his value was always a little inflated, and I was a little higher on him earlier in the cycle. But in 2023, yeah, the highs are very high. You look at the center fielder range plays where he's just hawking under deep passes and getting interceptions. He's a great playmaker for sure, and I do think he plays faster than his 40 time. But I do think there's some lapses in coverage as well, where he doesn't adhere to the pass off and carry rules and in zone coverage as well. And then in support, he's got a great dense frame. He can definitely levy hard hits with his momentum and his mass. But, I think his tackling form can be a little inconsistent sometimes. His angles can be a little inconsistent sometimes. So I don't think it's a reflection of, I would still consider him in round 3. I do think he's got day 2 ability for sure. But looking at, how he tested, right? And that's not something you go back and you cross check, right? You go back and you cross check. I do think he plays faster than that. But then looking at the lapses on tape, I think that's the biggest thing for me. I think there's just more variance with his play. Yeah, the highs are very high. He can erase space and coverage. He can hit you in support and he can halt your momentum, but he can also give up big plays with coverage lapses, and he can also miss tackles and take faulty angles too. So I think, the upside is really apparent with him, but there's also more variance, more volatility. And then you look at the testing and you're like, there's some apprehension there for sure. So I look at these strong safeties who I know can fit in a good role alongside McKinney, and I feel a little more secure about that than I do with Kinchins, who's he's very well rounded, but there's more volatility there.
Let's talk about the defensive line. They need, as I would like to call it, a big fat guy to help stop the run here at some point for the Packers. They've always been bad against the run, and that hasn't really changed. And now if they're going to play more of this 4-3 type look, they're definitely going to need a bigger guy, Gilbert Brown-esque, I guess, type guy there in the middle. The guy that I absolutely love and whose RAS score is like 4, which tells me the Packers probably won't draft him. But I think there should be exceptions to the rule. I think he's an exception to the rule when we start talking about the position he's going to play and what's to be expected out of him, and that's Devondre Sweat, the gigantic defensive tackle. That's who I would love in the second round if you can get your hands on him to help this Packers defensive line, who had a couple of kids last year that played really good, like Carl Brooks and so forth. But it's not exactly the body frame that I'm looking for this defensive line right now.
Yeah, it's tough when you run an even front scheme, because a lot of times, you're looking for that, when you're looking for that force multiplier, that's more odd front, because you can add an extra defensive back. So it's difficult to space that together. But I think Devondre Sweat, if you're looking for a guy who can hold the line and defend the run and encumber combo blocks and absorb double teams, he checks every box that there is to check in that department. I think as a pass rusher too, not the most athletic guy, but I think for his size, he's pretty good juice, and he's got great energy and motor as well. That's the thing with him. He doesn't usually die out on plays. He will provide effort on second effort and third effort attempts, and he's got some decent torque and shock in his hands too. So you got a lot of good things to work with him. It's just a matter of how much are they going to be utilized schematically with the Packers having more even front looks, right? So if you're going even front, I would look for a guy who has the mass to take on reps at one tech, right? But is not a pure zero tech or one tech, right? So within that mold, I look at a guy like maybe Dwayne Carter, who's 6'3", around 6'2", 6'3", almost 310. I think he's got enough density and power to kind of, have offensive linemen gravitate to him in the middle. He's so powerful, right? It usually takes 1 or 2 guys to corral him, and then that can free up other guys. And he's got some 3-tech utility as well. But one late round guy that I like a lot within that role as well is Fabian Lovett from Florida State. Around 6'4", I want to say 315, 35-inch arms. This dude is a hoss in the middle. I mean, he's so powerful and violent, and he's really good at acquiring leverage and driving power with his length. But then at the same time, too, once he anchors on you, really good grip strength and core strength, and he is very good at absorbing contact with his midsection too. So a lot of times you'll need a combo block just to get him off his center, but even then it's hard to move him. So Fabian Lovett from Florida State, if you're looking for that kind of player, makes a lot of sense. If you do want to dip into the nose tackle pool but past Devondre Sweat, you've got options like McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M, Justin Rogers from Auburn, Evan Anderson from Florida Atlantic. But for the Packers with their even front looks, I would try and blend the lines a little bit. It can be precarious because sometimes you get a master of none, but you also get more versatility than a pure nose tackle.
Yep, and that sounds like the Packer way, the master of none. But they can do a lot of things. That's exactly how they go about their offensive linemen as well, and we'll go there next. I still think you need competition for Rasheed Walker at left tackle, and that can come from moving Zach Thomas from right tackle to left tackle, where he played in college, and letting him come over and play left tackle, and you draft a right tackle. It could be drafting a right tackle and then sliding Tom inside to guard to replace John Runyon, who left. It could be just drafting a guard and going with both tackles. At 25, I think they're going to have their choice here of what they want to do. Tyler Guyton is a guy that I'm seeing mock there more and more as we get closer to the draft. I love Mims. I don't think he's going to get there. For your money at 25, is it worth taking a tackle there, or could they get one there with that Buffalo Bills pick? Not the Buffalo Bills pick, the Jets pick there at 41 in the second round.
Yeah, and it depends on what you're looking for at the end of the day. Do you want a right tackle, a left tackle? Do you want a left tackle who can play center? Do you want a left tackle who play guard, right? There's a lot of different areas for them to explore. And I think the Packers, one thing they've proven with guys like Elton Jenkins and Zach Tom is they do like positional versatility, right?
Yep.
If you can play different positions, that's a great thing for that line. So, I mean, in the first round, right, Troy Fatanu is an option that comes to mind, but I don't know if he's going to be available at 25 either because he tested very well. His tape is lights out, and he's got that versatility that other teams crave too. But Troy Fatanu would be a great addition because he can play tackle or guard, 6'4", 320, 34 and a half inch arms, really, really good recovery, athleticism, and hand usage as well. But if he's not there, Tyler Guyton would be a solid pick. And I like the idea of investing in a Tyler Guyton for the Packers because you don't need to start him right away. You have enough on the line where you can ease him in. You can let him develop behind the scenes. And then a year later, the dude is 6'7", 325, 34 inch arms. The dude is crazy explosive. And the flexibility is extremely impressive with him. And I think that can serve as a corrective failsafe while he's still learning the ins and outs, kind of help him withstand adversity. If he can reach the ceiling, man, you're looking at a high-level starter, right? So I think for the Packers who don't need to start him right away, that's appealing. That's appealing long-term, trying to get that guy in the lab, let him work on his mechanics a little bit. But if you want to pass on a tackle and go to round 2, this is the tough part, right? Because I think the strength of the 2024 NFL draft is the first round tackle group. We're hearing reports that maybe it could break the record for tackles taken in round 1, right? But then after that, it does trail off a little bit. You're looking at guys like Kieran Amagaji from Yale, who I'm a big fan of, right? Roger Rosengarten from Washington, who I'm also a big fan of. Amagaji has that tackle guard versatility. Rosengarten has that right tackle ability as well. So you still have options. Brandon Coleman from TCU, more of a third round guy, but again, also has that versatility and that athleticism they look for. But that's the trade-off with this class. If you don't get a guy in round 1, you're kind of rolling the dice that you're going to be able to get a guy in round 2 or 3 when the options are a little bit more scarce. So they're going to go off the board quicker, right? So that's the trade-off. Yeah.
So let's talk about that for a second, because you start talking about Coleman, and then you got that kid at South Dakota State who also has a huge RAS score as well. Both those guys can be guards. So if the deal is we believe in Rasheed Walker and we're going to leave Zach Tom, if the play is guard, I don't think you have to worry about a guard, necessarily in the first or second round. I think you can still probably get a pretty damn good guard in the third round of this draft to go in there to replace John Running, and you play with your 5. The other 4, I guess, that you had last year, that would make more sense. Now, if it's tackle, I don't know. I tend to think you probably need to go that way at 25 or 41 as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I think the 2 names that I mentioned, Kieran Amagaji from Yale or Roger Rosengarten from Washington, would probably be my top options at 41. If Jordan Morgan from Arizona or Kingsley Suamataia, if they're both off the board, which I think if they don't go round 1, they're going to go pretty quickly after round 1. So I'm thinking both of them will be off the board. But Kieran Amagaji is one of my favorite sleepers in this class. He can play left tackle. He's got guard experience too. 6'5", 320, over 36-inch arms. So this dude has the physical profile that you want. Yeah, and like a Yale guy, right? So FCS, he suffered a quad injury that knocked him out early in the 2023 campaign. But when he was on the field, he was dominant, man. When you watch an FCS guy, you want them to look at like a tier above their competition if they're in the early round conversation. And Kieran Amagaji, for an FCS guy that big, you check to see if they're a lumbering athlete. How do they transition? How do they get off the line? This dude is explosive. He changes direction very well. He's got range as a puller, and he's got great power drive and physicality as well. So I think Kieran Amagaji, again, you get him in the room as that versatile depth piece who can play tackle or guard in a year or so. If you need to file him in at tackle or guard, I think he's another guy who has high level starting upside. And then Roger Rosengarten, not quite as long. I think he's around 6'5", around 310, 33-inch arms, but he's a very good athlete, very good knee bend and leverage acquisition, very good flexibility. And he's got some great combative hand usage reps too, where he can maintain synergy with his footwork and his hands and gather guys. So both guys who have varying degrees of appeal. But my top options at 41, and I think the Packers, if you're considering those guys, there's reason to take for sure.
All right, let's talk about one last position. Talking with our guy, Ian Cummings. Follow him on Twitter at IC_draft, NFL draft analyst for Pro Football Network. Check out their new draft rooms that they have. You can draft with your buddies, your friends. You can have your own draft room with passwords, the whole deal. Check them out at profootballnetwork.com. I want to talk about quarterback of all positions. Mainly because Brian Gutekunst has come out and said pretty much that he wants to do the same thing Ron Wolf did when he was general manager of the Packers, which is we're going to take quarterbacks pretty much every year. We're going to take a quarterback, and we're just going to see what we come up with here. And if you go back to the Ron Wolf years, you had Mark Brunell that you're able to move. Then you had Matt Hasselbeck that eventually Holmgren was able to trade back for when he went to Seattle to be his quarterback, and they went to a Super Bowl. They had Aaron Brooks, who was third string, that Mike McCarthy traded for when he was with the New Orleans Saints to come be their quarterback. Brooks was never any good after McCarthy left. But either way, that's another guy they worked out. Ty Detmer, Matt Flynn. They've got a bunch of guys that were backups behind Favre or Rodgers that ended up going on to be starters in the NFL. Last year, the Packers draft Sean Clifford. Wasn't a big fan of that pick. And I don't think a lot of other people were either. He looked okay in preseason. They say he improved quite a bit during the season, taking practice reps and running with scout team and so forth. So we'll see what he looks like next year. Give me a couple of guys that might not be too bad and worth a flyer, maybe with some upside, maybe, on day 3 in round 6 or 7 or something along those lines.
Yeah, round 6 or 7. A couple guys that come to mind for me, and some of them might be round 4 or 5. It depends. Day 3 is tough because Aiden O'Connell is an example. I had him as more of a round 6 or 7. He went round 4, and he actually did pretty well in the right situation. So day 3, if a team likes a guy as a potential backup, they'll pick him a little earlier, right? But I think a couple guys that come to mind for me, Austin Reed from Western Kentucky. If you're looking for a guy who can operate the offense within structure, but also provide a little bit of creative talent for you, he's got some of that. He's not an elite athletic talent or an elite arm, but he's got enough arm elasticity to work off platform. He's got some gamer to him for sure, enough that you can operate with that Matt LaFleur offense with Jordan Love if you need to have him I'm blanking on the words. Come in and take a beat a little bit. Carter Bradley from South Alabama is another one, a bigger arm guy, not the most effusive creator. He's more of a pocket passer, but a very big arm. He's actually the son of Gus Bradley. So that's
okay.
Interesting. Yeah, some interesting trivia there. But big arm guy, a little bit of a stationary pocket passer, but the velocity is there. I think he's flashed good operation. He really improved his mechanics over the back end of his college career. So another potential backup. And then one more that I'll throw out there, like Reed, he was at the Shrine Bowl. Keaton Slovis from BYU. He started his career at USC and actually was a record-breaking true freshman at USC. He had some shoulder issues that kind of knocked him out. He spent a year at Pitt before finishing his career at BYU. He tested very well athletically. He's got the prototypical frame. I think when he's on, he's got really good mechanics. He's got pretty good arm. But I think with him, you're just waiting for him to put it all together. But he's got enough mechanical synergy where you can have him operate the offense in structure. He's got enough athleticism to work off platform. Another late round flyer who I think in the right system, right, could end up being a solid value deal and a solid backup. So those are a few. And I think those are the most deserving of opportunities for sure.
Is Ian Cummings. Follow him on Twitter at IC_draft. Check out all of his great stuff over there at Pro Football Network. And again, they're brand new draft rooms that they got. They're mock draft rooms. You and your buddies can all get into a mock draft room. If you're all fans of different teams, wherever the case may be, you do your own mock draft together. You can make it a whole big thing. Maybe you have a fantasy football league you're in. You want to draft all your fantasy football buddies to do a mock draft together. You can do that too with passwords and the whole fun thing. So make sure to check it out over there at Pro Football Network. Ian, thanks so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.